In this video we're going to look at how to find the area of a rectangle. Here I've got three rectangles drawn out on centimetre squared paper, and we're going to look at how you can work out the area of the rectangles and what area means. So we start with the second of those. The area of a shape, any shape, is the amount of space which is within the shape. So you can see inside this rectangle here there is more space than inside this rectangle here. We measure that space using units of centimetres squared quite often in maths, but also kilometres squared or metres squared or miles squared, any number of different units, but the point is we use squares for them. So one way of working out the area of this rectangle is to simply count the squares, and we can look at this one and say there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 square centimetres there, centimetres squared. So 15 would be a good answer there, and would be correct, but I want to not stick to counting squares. I want to develop a rule that we can use. So I want you to focus, instead of counting the squares, on counting the number of rows that we've got here. I'm going to highlight, if you can see that in green. There are 5 squares there. There are 5 squares there, and there are 5 squares there. So instead of counting the squares up individually, I could count up in fives. I could say 5, 10, 15. That would be a quicker way of doing it. And how many 5s did I count up there? It was 3 of them. So a really quick way of working out the area of this rectangle would be to do 3 lots of 5, which is 15. And don't forget the units. In this case I'm working on centimetre squared paper, so I'm going to use centimetres squared. I can use a similar method on this rectangle here. I could count the squares, or I could use the formula, which is the base times the height, or if you prefer, the length times the width. I'm just going to colour in to highlight again what I'm doing. So this time round there are 2 lots of 3. Okay, notice that the height is 2 centimetres and the width is 3 centimetres. So the area is 2 times 3, 2 lots of 3, which is 6. Now on this third rectangle I've deliberately drawn it to be 2.5 centimetres in height and 3.5 centimetres along. That's so that you can see that as we start to move into decimal numbers, 2.5 and 3.5, it becomes a lot more difficult to count the squares. So you cannot rely on counting squares for most questions about the area of rectangles. You need to use this method of multiplying the base times the height, or the length times the width, whichever words you want to use. So let's have a look and see if we can count the squares. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we've got these little half ones, 7, 8 and a half, and then this little one here which is a quarter. So it looks by counting to be 8 3/4, but again you can imagine if I used more difficult decimal numbers you wouldn't be able to count those squares accurately. So the thing to do is to use this little formula. I said earlier I had measured that to be 2.5 centimetres, and that's 3.5 centimetres. So we're going to do 2.5 multiplied by 3.5, and if you do that, you get 8.75 centimeters squared. Okay, let's have a look at some which are not drawn on centimetre squared paper now. So these ones you wouldn't be able to count the squares. You would have to use the method I've been trying to explain, the length times width, or the base times height. If we look at this question number 4, first off, notice the units are kilometres on this rectangle, and secondly, notice that there are 4 numbers written around the edge here. The formula, I'm going to stick with length times width. For the area of a rectangle. This is the area of a rectangle. It doesn't work for other shapes. There's a couple of others that it does work for, but you know, if you've got a triangle, you're going to need a different formula. So, how do we find the length times width? Well, some people make a common mistake here, and they will do 5 times 2 times 5 times 2, because they can see the 4 numbers and they know they have to multiply them. But it's really important that you just use one length. Let's call this the length, at 5 kilometres, and one width, like that. Okay, you can ignore these ones here. They would be used for working out the perimeter, but for the area you just need one length and one width, and you multiply those two together and you get the answer 10. And in this case, because we used kilometres, it's 10 square kilometres. This one, number 5 here, again a units issue. You need to look very carefully here. 4 meters, 250 centimeters. It's no good using this formula, length times width, unless your numbers are in the same units. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this 250 centimeters into meters, which is 2.5, and now I'm going to use these two numbers to multiply. And 4 times 2.5 gives you 10. Notice that I use the ones with meters in them, so my units are square meters.